Good morning, everybody. Oh my God, it's on. Good morning. How are you? Really? I had to be here at 7:30 for my tech check. I know you guys can do better than that. How are you this morning? Thank you. That's good. Now this is like, because, you know, how many of you guys, does anybody in here do speaking? A few people, yeah. So one thing that you need to know, I think is important to know about speakers, is that we get energy from you guys. So when you guys are we give energy, and then it's like, when we get it back, then we give more, and we get back, and it's like a feedback loop. So the more energy you guys give me, the more I give you, and vice versa, and it all works out. But I'm going to start by trying to give you guys some good energy this morning. So, wow, it's really raining. We don't see much of that in Florida in January through like May, so that's impressive. So I want to talk today about creativity, but kind of about what stands in the way of creativity and how to get a lot of that kind of gunk out of the way so that you can allow creativity to flow. And so my main kind of theory and kind of passion right now is talking about the inner critic and how that's the major block to creativity and how we can actually banish it and get rid of it and move on to the other side. So in case you don't know my Twitter handle, I'm Denise Jacobs. We're at MinneWebCon, as you know. And if you are feeling ambitious, if you want to use the hashtag for the talk, which is Banish Your Critic, please feel free to do so. Now, I was in the bathroom putting on my makeup at a leisurely rate, which means that I kind of messed it up as I was doing it, which was kind of awesome. I was like, wow, when I have less time, I just go and it looks fine. But I was thinking, oh, I wish that I had been able to I wish I had thought about this ahead of time. I should have made this a complete Prince-themed talk. I don't know why. And I was like, maybe I have enough time to like get a picture of him looking fabulous. You know, like with this big afro. I love this big afro and the like cheekbones. I was like, I should have had a picture just like to put his royal purple badness. But at the very least, I got purple on in memory of the man. If I can make any references to him during the talk, I will. Just to know. This is like the special Prince Memorial version. If you want the slides, they're already up online on SlideShare. You can go to this URL right here, and you can go there. I'll be tweeting it at the end of the presentation, and I also have another link, again, at the end of the presentation, so if you don't catch it here, that's okay. Now, a lot of times people, if you're familiar with the first book that I wrote, and the work that I used to do, which is CSS stuff, then you may be thinking, I'm sorry, how does a person go from being a CSS, expert to being a creativity evangelist? But I'm actually going to tell you a little bit of the story of what made me switch during this presentation and how actually getting to a place of criticism-free creating got me to the point where I wanted to become a creativity evangelist, and then took it a step further and started my company where I do consulting on creativity, and we come in and we do workshops and we do trainings and coaching, executive coaching, and all kinds of great stuff to help people work through creative blocks so they can do better work, essentially, which is really what I'm about. So, like all good things, this starts with a story. So I'm going to tell you the story. So once upon a time, in 2009, on June 29th, what I was setting out to do was to embark upon this journey, which I thought was going to be this wonderful creative journey, right? I was going to write my book, The CSS Detective Guide, and so I'm starting on all this. I'm going to be an author. It's a lifelong dream that I've had, and I was like, this is going to be amazing. But on June 29th, what I found out was that I started practicing, instead of creativity, what I like to think of as creativity's evil twin, which is destructivity, right? What happened was the voices in my head took me over, and they were absolutely, like, they showed absolutely no mercy. By the way, is anybody a Game of Thrones fan? Okay, so I just started watching Game of Thrones. I'm in like the beginning of season 3, and so the word mercy, 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 show mercy, is in my head a lot these days. So the voices in my head showed no mercy, and I totally like had this a major panic attack for 2 days. Now, this is a copy of an email that I sent to a women's tech group, networking group, that I used to be part of in Seattle called, it was Seattle Web Girls, and then it became Digital Eve Seattle. And I was in Miami, like totally bereft, without like a community and stuff, and I was like, I'll write an email to Web Girls, because this is like, you know, help me, Obi-Wan Kenobi, you're my only hope. So I sent this email, and you guys can't read it, the text is really small, so I'm gonna pull out the salient parts here. When I say I was freaking out, this is some of the stuff I wrote in the email. I shouldn't be writing this. I misrepresented myself, like somehow I, you know, put a roofie or something in the editor's drink, and that's how she wanted to give me this book contract. I don't know enough, even though I've been doing web stuff at that point in time for like, I don't know, 6, 7 years. This should be somebody else's book. Are you guys familiar with Estelle Whale? She used to be called the Standardista. Yeah, anybody know? Yeah, she's in the back. She's like, yeah, Estelle. So Estelle was my technical editor, and I kept thinking, this should be Estelle's book, because she's so much better at CSS than I am. I'm gonna look stupid, and how, I don't know. Everyone will see I'm a fake, that I don't really know what I'm talking about. And what if the book isn't good enough, and what if I'm not good enough, right? And so for 2 days, from June 29th, June 30th, I think I bucked up on July 1st finally, but for 2 days I spent crying. Well, it looked a lot like that little girl, except for she's got more hair than I do. She does, it's long, it's like, it's gonna be luxurious at one point in time in her life. I spent 2 days crying, like, and when I say crying, like you guys are probably like, oh, like you were like, oh, I can't write this book. But it wasn't cute like that. Like it was like, and then I finally get myself together, and and I get to the computer. Now, here's the thing. If you think about this, when I look back in retrospect, I think this is actually kind of hilarious, because what was I going to be doing? I wasn't actually going to be writing the book. I was going to do research. You know that like heavy work that you do when you get on the web, you look up something, you pull up an article and you read it? Like, that's what I was crying over, apparently, for 2 days. Like, not hard. But when I finally got myself together and I finally kicked into gear, then I swung to the polar opposite. And I worked my butt off, and I actually pushed myself to burnout. So the last 6 weeks of the book, like I was totally behind schedule. I had given them a really aggressive schedule of 4.5 months, which if you talk to anybody who's written a tech book, they're like, it takes 9 months. But I didn't do that, right? I just was like, I'm gonna be like a superwoman. So I worked myself to death, and I finally got like 4 months into it, and I'd only written half of it, or like the past 4 months, and I was like, I really need to finish this thing. So I hunkered down for 6 weeks, and I pulled a 6-week all-nighter. And what that looks like is you wake up, you work until you can't work anymore. I slept for 2 hours, maybe 3. If I was feeling like really generous or I couldn't stand it, like I'd sleep for 4 hours. I'd finish a chapter, and then I would sleep for the whole night, and then I would do it again. And I did that for 6 weeks to bust out the last 5 chapters, 6 chapters, something like that. It was crazy. So totally got burned out. Now, all of this was because of these internal critical voices that were kind of driving me and pushing me and telling me that it wasn't good enough, and it's got to be great, and you got to show people and stuff. And it made anxiety, pain, depression, total stress happen. Now, I'm going to break from my story for a moment and talk about this kind of stress and this fear. So when you're feeling fear and you're having like this kind of fear reaction, what are some physical, and this actually I'm requiring participation, so you have to say something, unless of course you're eating a Danish, in which case you should just chew it. What are some of the physical responses that you've had for fear? Heart pounding. What else? Sweat. Right? Anybody like? I always think about it as like you're really, really like nervous and you pit out, right? And then you have to give a presentation and you're like doing this. Please look at this wonderful thing on this thing. So sweat, heartbeat. What else? Yes. What about like indigestion? Yeah? Any of that stuff? So, or your stomach turns, you feel nauseous, right? Anybody like, they call them butterflies, but it's even worse. And people are like, yeah, I was going to go up and present, and I just felt like throwing up. So, physical evidence of fear, right? But this is a different kind of fear. This is like internalized, and the internalized stuff is like really subtle and insidious, right? And so I feel like these fears and internalized criticisms basically equals the inner critic, right? And so I don't know if you've heard this acronym for fear. This one, false evidence appearing real. Have you guys heard that before? So there's another lesser known acronym which I think is even more accurate sometimes, which is what we do, which is, do I have to be family friendly here? Can I, Sarah? Can I be like, no, fuck everything and run, right? Because that's what happens when you get like afraid that you're just, that's it, I'm out of here. So the problem is that fear is a mind killer, but it's not just a mind killer, right? Like it messes you up. But it also is the enemy of creativity. And I'm saying that not just from like, it's a nice idea, but I'm also saying this from a neuroscience perspective. Stress and frustration actually suppresses the generative impulses in your brain. The impulses that create ideas, right? That process actually gets truncated. And so if you don't believe, like if you need this kind of broken down a little bit more, let's think about this. Thoughts basically are the equivalent of electrical impulses. We don't think about that when we're thinking because that's not what we do. We're thinking about other things. But that's what it actually is. And these electrical impulses actually translate into brain waves. And these brain waves and these electrical impulses, and there's also neurochemistry that goes on and like certain chemicals and things like that that are released in your brain or that aren't released in your brain that are suppressed when you're having fear thoughts, which is what messes you up. Interestingly enough, when we talk about brain waves, there's also evidence that shows there's a whole, how many of you guys are familiar with the brain waves, the different brain waves there are? Yeah, okay, so quicko brain wave introduction here. So at the very top is gamma, which is the fastest one, which is usually what you are in a crisis situation, in anxiety, sometimes also euphoric, and sometimes is what you go into when you have an aha moment and then you drop back down into a slower brainwave. Beta brainwaves is what you're in kind of normal, like focus and concentration, and when you're like externally focused on the world. Alpha is when you're more internally focused, what you experience before you're falling asleep, when you're like in states where you're in the zone, in the flow. Creativity flows a lot during alpha. Theta is even lower than that when you're sleeping, when you're dreaming, and delta is even lower than that. When you are in a fear place, you are actually in beta, high beta, and then sometimes gamma. And that is not the place where creativity happens. It happens when your brain is actually in a slower brainwave pattern. So I say all that to say is that fear actually blocks creative expression. And Shelley Carson, who was a researcher at Harvard who wrote the book Your Creative Brain, says that when you're in that place, that fear place, it's a bad thing. But when it's self-imposed, it's even worse, and that will actually stall or truncate or completely shut down your creative efforts. So let's go a little deeper then. How can we identify the inner critic? What does it look like? Now, some of you guys are just like, I know what my inner critic looked like. We got a relationship, okay? But just in case you're not familiar with some of the ways that it can show up, I'll tell you. So first, what you need to do is listen for inner critical talk. And the thing that might be interesting that you might find is once you start to tune into this, you may be like, dang, that's there like all the freaking time, right? So things like, oh, you're not good enough, you never finished that, you should have done like the master's program that you had signed up for that you like punked out on. Dad wanted you to be a doctor. My parents wanted me to be an engineer, because they thought that would be like the surefire way for me to have a job all the time as a black woman. They'd be like, oh, companies will be lining up. And I was like, look at me. Have I said anything, any interest in engineering ever in the history of ever in my life? Like, probably not a good match. I don't think you're pretty enough or smart enough or talented enough, or you don't know what you're doing or any of that stuff. If you have those thoughts, which we all do, that is inner critical talk. Another way that the inner critic shows up is if you're just constantly busy all the time. Those people who are just like, oh my God, I'm so busy, right? And they say it pulling their hair back or pushing a bangs forward, as Chelsea Schlesinger does, one of the comedians. Does this. I'm so busy all the time. And there's like a long litany, and you're just like, dude, what are you running away from? Like, you actually don't have to be busy. You're choosing to sign up for all of this stuff, right? Another thing is that comparing yourself to other people. I should have done more. Are you guys familiar with Molly Holzschlag, who is like the great godmother of the web industry? Yeah, Molly. So Molly is one of my mentors. And back early in my career, before I knew any better, I would look at her and I'd be like, how is it possible that she's written like 37 books, right? Which she has, and probably more at this point in time. Just amazing, right? And you compare yourself to that. I talked to a friend of mine the other day. I was like, Jason, how many books have you written? He was like, 18. I was like, oh my God, he writes a book about stuff he doesn't even care about anymore. That's just what he does. He just writes a book. I'm gonna write a book, okay. You compare yourself to other people, and then it's another way that the inner critic shows up. Or if you have thoughts like, any moment they will find out I do not know what the heck I'm doing, right? And a few people are just like, please get out of my head, right? They're gonna find out I'm a fraud. This is imposter syndrome, and this is another way the inner critic shows up. Now, this is not to be confused with what maybe one of your managers has, which is the Dunning-Kruger effect, which is when people are completely incompetent, but they think they've nailed it every time. Boom, did it, and what's happening is everybody in the background is trying to make them look good, yep, you sure did, you did it. All this stuff was falling to hell, and we fixed it for you. Dunning-Kruger effect is actually very real, and it is a thing, but most of the time, if you have imposter syndrome, you're not experiencing Dunning-Kruger effect. Another way it shows up, it needs to be perfect. I cannot let this out the door unless it is absolutely perfect and there are no flaws in it, because if there are no flaws in it, then nobody can criticize me and then I'm safe, right? Or the other side, sometimes, of perfectionism, which is procrastination, I'll do it tomorrow. But no, really, I'm going to do it tomorrow. No, seriously, stuff came up and it was crazy. I will totally do it tomorrow or next week or next year is what it happens to me. Now, when that happens, those are all ways the inner critic shows up. But let's actually meet your personal inner critic. You guys have all got paper on your tables and pens. I want everybody to grab a piece of paper, one piece of paper and a pen, please. And once you do that, this, by the way, this is for everybody. Don't think that you shouldn't participate. This is for everybody. Everybody. Now, some people, I've seen it where people are just like, I got a piece of paper and it was blank. Write something down. Okay. So, get your piece of paper, blank piece of paper and a pen. Everybody got a piece of paper and a pen? What I want you to do is I want you to write down one fear that you have, or one anxiety, or one misgiving, or one discomfort, or whatever, about your own creativity or your own ability to create. Now, please keep in mind, nobody knows your handwriting, and don't sign your name on it. Don't say, "Love Dave," or put your Twitter handle on it. Do not do that. Just write down the one thing on the piece of paper. You can get as deep as you want, because guess what? Nobody here is going to know who it came from. Once you've written it down, One thing, don't write down a list. One thing. You guys do not look like you're writing. They're like, I read it already. Write it down. Once you've written it down, I want you to crumple it up in a ball. I gave this talk at Facebook a couple of months ago, and I said, and when you're done, I want you to show me your balls. Oops, I didn't mean to say that. So when you're done with it, crumple it up, and I want you to hold it in your hand so that I know that you did, like, now I can see who participated and who think they don't have to. This is for everybody. I made them get special paper and pens specifically for you guys. Now, everybody, we'll wait for the people who are still writing. Okay, stand up. He's like, ready. Okay, the people in the front of the room, I want you to turn towards the back of the room. The people in the back of the room, I want you to stay turning forward. So you've got it crumpled in a paper, blah, blah, blah. You got it crumpled in a ball, right? Stand up. Everybody got your thing? So let's see. Do we still have it clearly delineated? You guys are like front, so like to the middle table. So on the count of 3, I want you to throw the ball as far as you can. Now, please keep in mind that the people at the back of it, they still need to get a ball too. So if you're like in the front of your thing, kind of try to throw it to the back. Throw it as far as you can. There should be some. I should be hitting the head with a ball. Are you ready? No, not me. Don't throw it at me. 1, 2, 3. All right. Pick up a ball. Oh, and by the way, your mother is not here, so let's try to keep the room fairly clean. Find a ball. If you don't have one, let people know so they can give you one. Distribute balls. My best friend would be so happy that I keep saying balls. All right. Now, anybody? Extra ball? Need a ball? Got a ball? Everybody got a ball? This is why I didn't want you to sign your name on it. And this is why nobody knows who wrote what. Now, I want to hear what people wrote. Okay, wait. Let's not get crazy. All right, what we got? I won't find my outlet. That's what this person has. Oh, yes. Being judged. Afraid of being judged. Love it. What else? I won't be able to technically execute it. What else we got? Too much to do. Oh my God. By the way, the other thing is, will you guys actually keep these on the table for me? Because I actually use these for research. It sounds weird, but it's true. I don't have the background or knowledge to make it good enough. Let me have one or two more. We got. My JavaScript skills should be better. And in JavaScript, insert whatever you want. My Photoshop, my Illustrator. Others won't like it. Did any of those sound familiar? Resonate? Yeah? One more. I don't have the patience to learn anything truly new. So then just sitting in with what you have, right? So I personally love this exercise because it's fascinating that this stuff is so real and it's so raw and it's so, everybody has this. All of this sounds familiar. It won't be good enough. I don't know enough. I should have done this, like blah, blah, right? Really, really familiar. So you're in good company. As a matter of fact, does anybody watch Riding in the Cars with Comedians? Jerry Seinfeld, whatever it is. Comedians in cars, getting coffee, whatever. He did an episode where he talked to Jimmy Fallon. And they were sitting there having pancakes at a pancake house in California, which I'm just like, where was that? Those pancakes looked amazing. And they were talking, and Jerry says to Jimmy, so do you ever have moments where you just feel like you can't do this anymore? he was like, I woke up this morning and I thought, I can't do this show. Like, I don't have what it takes to do this show. And Jimmy says, I feel like that all the time. He's like, except for when I'm at the curtain and I'm behind the curtain and then the curtain opens and the light hits me, that's when I know I'm in the right place. And then Jerry said, he says, I feel like this all the time, and I feel like I don't have what these people want to see. They want to see a funny guy. That's not me. Jerry Seinfeld, you guys, like, how long was his show on for? It was like one of the most successful sitcoms, like, in the history of television. And he still has moments where he's like, they don't want to see me. They want to see a funny guy. I'm not a funny guy. What? That's crazy. So, in order to unleash creativity, obviously, we need brain management. We need to figure out how to manage those thoughts in our brain, these things that we wrote down. We need to figure out how to do this. Nikki Giovanni is a very famous African-American poet and writer, says that you must be unintimidated by your own thoughts, because if you try to create with somebody looking over your shoulder, you'll never be able to create. So, let's talk about how we finally banish the inner critic. Now, you can't outrun the voices, right? Like, they're always going to be there. So you need to figure out how to deal with them. Like, so there's one version of the inner critic, which I like to call imposition mentality. And that is that kind of feeling where you have to do something. And Sarah said this earlier today, where she said, you know, these jobs that we have that we love, that we have forgotten that we loved, right? So when you have those moments where you're like, oh, I have got to do this thing. I've got to go and like figure out a new content strategy for this department. Oh, I've got to do so-and-so. Whoop, time out. You don't have to do anything. This is your job that you have applied for and that you said yes to, and this is the work that you have signed yourself up to do. You get to do this. As a matter of fact, I have a friend who has tuberculosis, or who had tuberculosis, and he's recovered from it. And he was doing training for a marathon last year as a fundraiser for tuberculosis. And he was like, yeah, and I'm like, you know, I got to train and blah, 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 blah. And I was like, Shaka, 2 years ago, where were you? And he was like, I was in the hospital thinking that I was going to die. I was like, right. And you're doing what now? And he was like, I'm training for a marathon. I was like, right. So do you have to train for a marathon, or do you get to train for a marathon? Because you thought you were going to die. And he was like, damn. And I was like, right, exactly. So the words have to, should, must, ought are all words that are actually this kind of put upon victimhood. F.E.A.R in the book, The Productivity and the Now Habit, talks about this a lot. And he says that what you really need to do is you need to replace those words with I choose, I decide, I will, knowing that this is something that you've actually chosen to do. Jane McGonigal in the book Reality is Broken talks about eustress versus normal stress. And eustress is good stress. Normal stress is the stress where you feel like something has been put upon you externally. But eustress, which is what happens when people play games and they do gaming, is the stress that you're under when you have taken on a challenge. When you use words like I decide, I will, I choose, you have decided to take on the challenge, and then you can actually move yourself into a state of eustress. Another way that we can get rid of the inner critic is by recognizing comparison syndrome and having some tools to deal with it. So if you're comparing yourself, like Molly started writing books for the web, like, I don't know, back in the 60s or something, like a long time ago, right? There's no way I'm going to write 37 books on the web, nor do I actually want to write 37 books on the web. So what I like to do, especially and I am particularly prone to comparison syndrome, so I have stopped like reading like my Twitter feed and stuff like that, because otherwise I'll just go into a downward spiral and I'll be like worthless for the rest of the day. But I also like to remember this phrase, this saying that you cannot compare your insides to somebody else's outsides. When you look at what other people are doing and everything, and you look at all the things, the success that it looks like they're having, you get yourself off the track of actually being what's called self-referential and realizing what you've done is your own thing and what they've done is their own thing. So say no to comparisons and realize that what you produce and what you do is unique. One of the things I like to think of is this little tidbit of information, which is incredibly true, but that we forget. You, as a person, as an individual, are the only you that's ever going to exist in the world. Nobody has your genes, nobody has your fingerprints, nobody has your vocal patterns, nobody has your iris patterns. Nobody can be you but you. You're the only one. So do it. Be you, do you. And like really do it up. Comparing yourself to other people is a waste of time. If you're prone to the kinds of stuff that I am, I know all this stuff logically, but it still happens, then you can establish boundaries. Say no to social media, and apply this as your new mantra, that I will not compare myself to strangers on the internet. And I like to add to that, or acquaintances, or friends on Facebook or Instagram, right? Because those versions, we've done tons of studies, the versions of what people share on social media is like the heightened version of what they want to be, not necessarily who they are. Imposter syndrome. Let's talk about some ways to beat imposter syndrome. If you have that feeling like they are gonna find out at any moment, I am going to get fired because they're gonna find out that they made a mistake, right? Here's one really powerful tool for imposter syndrome is to remember the imposter syndrome paradox, which is that if you're experiencing imposter syndrome, it actually means that you're competent and skilled. There's a book called The Secret Thoughts of Successful Women by Valerie Young, whom, by the way, I did a little fangirl move and I like sent her an email. I was like, oh my God, your book was like totally amazing. And she wrote me back and she was like, thanks. And I was like, I would totally love to talk to you. And she was like, great. And so I actually talked to her last week on the phone. Woo! So fangirl moves work. So, and one of the things that she says in her book is her whole book is all about imposter syndrome, and not just for women, but for everybody. But that she says that the people who are afflicted with imposter syndrome are the people who are actually the most qualified and the most skilled out of all people. Like, it's only when you are having a certain level of competence and skill that you will experience imposter syndrome. You won't otherwise. So if you have it, that means that you're a badass. Right? Woo! Right? So remember this when you're having imposter syndrome, so you can have this and you can think, oh, I'm doing that thing, and then you can move on to something else. Here's some psychology hacks that we have for what I like to call general inner criticisms, right? So the inner critic is basically an amalgamation of all of the critical things that you've heard in your life, and here's my Prince reference. So you guys know in the song When Doves Cry, and he says, maybe you're just like my mother, never satisfied, right? So maybe you had a mother who was never satisfied and then who pushed that back on you, and then you were like, oh, if whatever I do is not good enough, and I have to do more, and I have to do blah, 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 blah. Here's a really good trick for dealing with your inner critic is to actually ask it questions. It's this psychological construct, right? So you just turn the tables on it. Okay, who are you? Where do you come from? What do you want? And my personal favorite is, so what's your point? So, okay, so I am doing a crap job on this. What's your point? What do you want? I don't care. Or I'm working as hard at this as I can. So what's your point? And just to disarm your inner critic so that your brain can actually go to something else, right? Another thing you can do is to realize, because it is the psychological construct that was created to try to keep you safe, right? The inner critic was there because somehow somebody said something critical or something went sideways in your life, and you're like, okay, I'm not going to let that happen again. I'm going to have to be super hyper vigilant and try to forestall anything that's happening. You can be compassionate to your inner critic, and you can say, okay, I totally understand that you're trying to keep me safe, but I actually have to get this stuff done, or I want to do this stuff. I'm choosing to do this stuff, and this is what I'm doing. So tell you what, let's make a deal. You can actually reassign duty to your inner critic. When you're in a phase of ideating and trying to come up with ideas, which is always when it comes up and says, nope, that color's wrong. No, you need another font. No, you should try this. Did you think of this? You forgot this. Why didn't you do this? Blah, blah, blah. And you're like, really? Shut up! I'm trying to work here. That you can actually say, look, I'm actually coming up with ideas right now. I need you in the editing phase, because the inner critic is fantastic when it comes to editing and when it comes to vetting and when it comes to actually trying to like winnow, right? The inner critic is great for that. So come back later. Like, I need you in a couple days when I'm editing this or when I'm trying to go through this and figure out what's good and what's not. That's when I need you. Please come back then. And sometimes that'll be like, oh, okay, great. I got a job. I can do something. I can still keep this person safe. Awesome. Another thing that you can do is the inner critic a lot of times is really there because people are afraid to fail, right? So if you're having this kind of like, if I do that, like, what if I fail, right? The odd thing about this is that it's a self-fulfilling prophecy. When you start being so freaked out that you're going to fail and you start like sabotaging yourself, and then invariably you will actually set that up for yourself. Here's a nice little quote that I like to think of for this sort of thing, especially for fear of failure, is that fear is not real. It's a product of the thoughts that you create, as I've been talking about. Danger is real, but fear is a choice. So when you have those moments and you have those fears of failure, realize that you're choosing to be afraid of this potential failure that isn't actually happening yet, and that you can choose something else. Another thing that you can do is you can embrace failure. There's been popular in the last 10 years for everybody to talk about failure and failing fast and learning from failure and what I've learned from failure and how failure is great and awesome. So get on the bandwagon and like actually try to do things wrong and deliberately, or like try to do it like, well, I'm just going to do what I can, and if it's wrong, I'm going to learn from it, right? Great quote from Stephen Johnson in Where Good Ideas Come From is that being right keeps us in place and being wrong forces us to explore. So when you are wrong, it does make it like, if you were right about everything, how boring would life be, right? Like if you made no mistakes ever, first of all, you wouldn't actually be that motivated to learn stuff, and you wouldn't actually be that motivated to gain mastery. You wouldn't even know what gaining mastery looked like, right? So it's only by actually making mistakes that you actually learn and you actually get better. I like to think of, how many of you guys have children? How many are parents? So, have you been mystified and at wonder at sometimes watching your children kind of grow up and go through the growing process? He's laughing, right? So, children, I feel like, are the masters of fail, and the reason that they're the masters of fail is that they're so zen about it for the most of the time until they get to a certain age. They don't care, especially babies, right? When babies are walking, when they're learning to walk, they take some steps and they fall down, and then they're like, now just think of what it'd have been like if like every child like got upset after the first step and after falling on their butt. Oh my God, I can't do this. Mom just saw me. I'm totally embarrassed. Grandma saw me too. My big sister, I'm never gonna take a step again. That was just horrible, right? Like we would never walk. But babies don't care. They're just totally like, boom, and they're like, whoop, and they get back up, and then they like get to you, and they're smiling, and they're like all happy. Oh my God, you did so well to me, oh my God, right? And so think about that. Think about that we all went through that process, and we all had those moments where we're like, totally don't care, just doing this single-minded focus, got to get to mom or dad or grandma or whoever, and like that was the thing. So take steps, fail, go again, because failure is only the opportunity to begin again more intelligently. Now, another way the inner critic shows up, and we had this, actually, I want that piece of paper so bad. Fear of being judged. I'm afraid I'll be judged. Here is a great thing to think of when it comes to being judged, also with a cute squirrel picture, which is most people, and it's sad to kind of think about it in a way, but it's also kind of comforting at the same time, most people are so concerned with themselves, they are not paying attention. They just aren't. Right? And I like it, like think about that, like I just think, oh, I'll look really stupid. And I just be like, nobody's paying attention to me, man. They're like too busy staring at their own navels. I can do whatever, I can mess up, and it doesn't matter. I'm really the only person who's paying attention, who cares? So remember egocentricity when you're thinking about that. And even if they do judge you, here's another thing that's kind of snarky, but it works. I always kind of feel like if people, don't you love when people like start pointing out like problems on the website? Sometimes they're valid, but sometimes they're just like trying to just say something just to be right. And I'm just like, you know what? If it's like that big of a deal, maybe you can come and fix it. Because like I'm like trying to do some other stuff here. So that's another thing too, is I'm always like, well, you know, like I don't actually care. So if it's that important to you, you should do something about it. And another thing we can do as a general inner criticism. Now, once I get done with this, I'm going to talk about perfectionism and procrastination, which I'm going to spend more time on, but this kind of general stuff. Another thing you can do is you can do a mind-body hack. So has anybody seen Amy Cuddy's TED Talk? Yeah? So if you haven't seen her TED Talk, she's got a really great quote in it, which is that our bodies change our minds change our behavior, and our behavior changes our outcomes, right? And so we often forget, and especially because we're in this industry where we're like really in our heads and we're thinking and we're conceptualizing and visualizing and ideating all the time, it's kind of interesting to remember that our bodies and our brains actually work together in concert. So I would like everybody to stand up. Por favor. 39 minutes, I got 10 more minutes. Okay, now, this is what Amy Cuddy says. If you hold a power pose for like 15 seconds or longer, you will actually effectively change what you're thinking. So this is what I want you guys to do. I want everybody to close your eyes. And I'm going to close my eyes too, but I can see if your eyes are open, by the way, right now. So close your eyes. What I want you to do is I want you to put your body into like the most like pathetic, one down, inner critic, having a field day type of position. So I suck and everything I do is not very good and my JavaScript skills kind of are bad and somebody's going to judge me and it's not good enough and I don't know enough and my skills aren't high enough and not that. And you really like just like lay it on really thick and do this. You're closing your eyes so nobody can see you and you can't see anybody. So you just be in your body. Now, when you got to the point where you feel like as pathetic as you possibly can, I want you to shake it off. Whew, and assume your best superhero position. Whether that is Superman, whether that is Batman versus Superman, whoever you want, get in a position. Arms akimbo, hands on your hips. Maybe you're pointing off into the distance. Maybe you're flying. Maybe you're getting a karate kick in there somewhere. Get your power position on and hold it. Now, like I said, 15 seconds or more actually starts to make your body communicate to your brain that you're safe and that you're okay and that you can handle it and that you're badass. Okay, break. Let's do it one more time. Pathetic. Oh my God, it's so horrible. Why haven't I done this? I should have done a master's degree. I should have a PhD. I'm with all these smart people and everybody knows more than I do. Okay, shake it off. I just got tired of hearing that. Shake it off and hit your power position. By the way, if anybody's got their hands over their heads and their fists in triumph, Amy Cuddy says that congenitally blind people actually will hold that position as a position of triumph. You can break now. So this is actually the universal position of triumph, and blind people know how to do it. So the way I like to think about it is that we are wired for success. Thank you for you guys. You can sit down. Thank you. Yay, that was fun. So that is not just a feel-good exercise. That is an actual hack that you can use. If you're going into a meeting, if you're like starting to beat yourself up over something, just get up, go into the bathroom. If you're going on a date, sometimes it's important, right? You need confidence. Go into the bathroom or wherever it is and then just stand there and just breathe it in and just stand and make yourself stand as long as you possibly can. Even put a timer on, 30 seconds. Okay, I'm just going to stand here like this. And this will actually happen. I've actually had people come back to me and say, yeah, it actually worked. Like I did this before a meeting and I felt a lot better. So it is a real hack. Now, perfectionism and procrastination, I like to save as a separate thing because I like to think actually of them as evil twins. And they feed each other. There's actually been a lot of studies that have shown that perfectionists tend to procrastinate because they want it to be perfect, and procrastinators tend to procrastinate because they want it to be perfect and they're perfectionists. I actually wrote an article called Breaking the Perfectionism Procrastination Infinite Loop, and I have to tell you that the article was 2 weeks later than I gave them the date for. I gave it to them 2 weeks later, and it was supposed to be 700 words, and I clocked in at 2,100 words. So who needs that information? Me, which is why I wrote the article. So let's talk about how we can break the loop. So perfectionists really kind of go for this, dysfunctional thinking, and it can lead to discouragement and like mental exhaustion, and I can testify to that. Perfectionism has been known to be the self-abuse of the highest order. And what ends up happening, again, another thing that I can testify, is that a lot of times when you're a perfectionist, you have this vision in your head, right? And this vision in your head is like beautiful, gorgeous, like it's this, and then you're trying to attain this vision that you have in your head. But it's just a vision, and if you get close to it, that's almost as good as achieving it, right? Or it is as good because it's better than having it done. Perfectionists tend to focus on the finished product, right, instead of the process. As people say, you have to focus on the journey and not the destination. And I was like, I just want to get there. So what they've done is they actually did a study. And they took a pottery class, and they split it in half. They said, okay, look, this half, what I want you to do is I want you guys to throw the perfect pot. Got it? Perfect pot. This side of the class, what I want you guys to do is I want you to throw as many pots as possible. You got 30 minutes, go. What do you think happened? I'm actually asking you. What do you think happened? Yeah. Perfect pot side didn't get anything done. What else? They probably made some pretty good ones or some pretty awesome ones. What else? What do you think the different sides experienced, feeling-wise, sensation-wise? The best wasn't happy. What did you say back there? Joy on the side of making the most. Yes to all of this. So why? Why? What was going on for the perfectionist side? What were they doing? Criticizing, killing themselves. It was never perfect, right? And so it never passed in muster. Whereas what was going on the as many as you can side? Practice. Every time they made a mistake or every time they learned from it, and then the next time they adjusted. Every time. Has anybody actually thrown pottery here with a pottery wheel and everything? So you got to get it centered on the thing. You got to get it like in the right place, and then you like pull up from the top, and like if it's off or the pressure's off or anything, then it's too thin, it's too thick and everything. And so as you do it and you feel it, then you start to like get it, oh, okay, this is what I have to do. And every time you get better at it. So the more pots they threw, the better they got at it, and they had a better process. So I like to think of that as thinking when you're doing something, don't try to make it perfect. Try to like iterate on it, and iterating is going to get you to a better place than making it perfect. Another technique, another tactic that I like for this, especially as a person who's a recovering perfectionist, is to actually make it bad on purpose. When I was writing my first book, one of the things that I did to try to get myself, when I started getting into this paralysis place, was I'd be like, all right, you know what? I'm going to write a really bad sentence. And then I'm going to write a really bad paragraph, and then I'm going to write a horrible section, and then this chapter is going to suck. And when I did that, and I gave myself permission to just whatever came out was okay, then I actually would write. And then I was like, look, I can always edit it later, but I just need to write something now. And so now I've started on my next book, and I'm doing the same thing. You know what? I hate this, and I'm just going to write it. I just need to write something. I hate it, and I don't care. I'm just going to write it. You also have to embrace what a friend of mine calls the shitty first draft, the SFD. Is anybody familiar with this lovely? So this is Twitter, the very, 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 very first instance of Twitter's homepage back in 2006. Everybody's like, what? Right? They didn't have Douglas Bowman on there making circles within circles within circles for pretty birds and stuff, all harmonious and stuff. They had glistening letters. Wet-looking letters. And whatever, and that was okay. They were like, you know what, we need to put something up. We don't even know what we're doing. We're just going to do this, and this is just going to have to work. And it did. And then they iterated, and they made it better over time. Another thing for perfectionists is to do something called satisficing. Has anybody heard of satisficing? Satisficing is a combination of satisfactory and sufficient, which means that perfectionists tend to give 150%, right? You put something out, it is going to be the most awesome, perfect, wonderful thing that anybody's ever seen, is going to blow their socks off immediately. Your version of perfect and wonderful is like everybody's a version of like, oh my God, I can't even believe it, it's amazing. Your 80% is probably the equivalent of most people's 110%. So for perfectionists especially, try satisficing. Try going to your own personal 80%. Doesn't mean not doing it well, doesn't mean giving something crap, but doing something and doing it till it's good enough for you. And then putting it out in the world and getting feedback and using that to iterate on. Instead of doing your own 100%, which is like superlative, do your own 80%, which is going to be fantastic. And to also remember that done is beautiful. Done is good. It doesn't need to be perfect. It just needs to be done, really. And also to remember that perfection and excellence are two totally different things. So you can do something really, really well with mastery, with skill, but it doesn't mean that it has to be perfect, and you don't have to kill yourself to try to get to that place. So, love this quote, that you don't let perfect become the enemy of good. Now, let's get to procrastination because I only have a few more minutes. Now, what happens with procrastinators is that it's as bad as perfectionism, right? Procrastinators like, and again, as a recovering procrastinator, squander precious time and resources, attention and focus, but it's also the constant stress of having that thing hanging over your head, which is almost worse than anything else. And have you ever procrastinated on something so long, and then when you finally did it, you're like, that took 15 minutes. I spent more time thinking about trying to do this thing than it actually took to do it. Every time, right? Now, the goal is not to figure out which kind of procrastinator you are. And I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's this field guide to procrastinators. Hilarious. She's like got 12 different kinds of procrastinators. Like, maybe you're the panicker. Maybe you're the list maker. Maybe you're the snacker. Maybe you're the social sharer. Like, I'm not doing anything. Selfie. So it's not figuring out what kind of procrastinator you are. And it's not, the trick is not also administering a dose of fuck it all. Like, that's just it. That doesn't even matter. I'm not going to do it. Remember that procrastinators, and again, as somebody who's a recovering procrastinator, it's not that we're lazy. It's not about laziness. It's really more about having this high level of frustration, a high level of basically not being able to handle a high level of frustration and anxiety about failing, right? So when you procrastinate on something, it's usually because you don't know what to do, you don't know how to do it, or you think it's going to take more time than you have, right? Like those are definitely that for me. And it's because you're actually viewing this thing that's concrete in abstract terms, and you don't understand how to break it down. And it's this kind of unknown part that can be frustrating and can be like paralyzing, right? So one way that you can deal with when you're in that place where you're like, I just don't really know what to do, and that's the part that paralyzes you, is to try to actually replace the fear of the unknown with curiosity. As soon as you become curious about something, I don't know what to do, but let me figure it out. Let me find out. Let me ask this person. Let me look at this. Let me look up this. Oh, there's that involved? Okay. And as soon as you become curious about it, boom, it totally changes and it totally switches. So, little anecdote from my own life. I am obsessed with gardening right now. My whole backyard is an organic garden. Thank you. Thank you very much. We can talk, we can geek out about gardening afterwards, because I would love to do that. Be like, and I've got papayas and pineapples and tomatoes, because, you know, I live in a tropical climate. But I got the idea to build a trellis out of rebar, and there was a point where I was like, oh, I don't know how to do this. I mean, I'm going to have to weld something, and how do you bend rebar and all this stuff? And what ended up happening was curiosity kicked into gear, and I just went nuts, and I started researching all the stuff. And so like I got like a list of articles and this, and that you can do it this way, and you can turn it this way, and you can, and I was like, then I was finding like, websites where you could calculate the arc of something given these dimensions. And totally geeked out about it. So it could have been something where I was so overwhelmed, I was like, I can't do that, I'm just gonna hire somebody to do it. But instead, I replaced that fear of the unknown with curiosity, and now, this weekend, it's on. So, the other thing too, when people procrastinate, a lot of time it's because the task is viewed, you don't really have a sense of meaning or value with the task. So the task is like something where you're like, I need to do this, but you don't know like how important it is in the grand scheme of things. You guys may be like this on projects. If you only know your little part of the project, you're not as inclined to do it as if until you know, oh, when I do my piece, then I give it to this person who can do this, which can make this whole thing happen. So increasing the value, sometimes even just finding out, wait a minute, what does this mean in the grand scheme of things, can actually change you to get out of procrastination mode. And then finally, there's some mind tricks that you can do. When you're procrastinating, a lot of times it just seems like starting is the hardest thing. So trick yourself into starting by not actually doing the task, but by starting to do the task. Get everything ready. You ever had that? Like I did this when I was like, I'm just gonna make a meal. I'm just gonna like get everything ready. And then I'm gonna do something else, and I'm gonna come back and I'm gonna cook it. And by the time I got everything ready, I was like, are you kidding? I'm totally cooking this now, right? So get everything ready. Get all the windows open, get all the applications open, get your notes there, get all of the things, all of these pieces of inspiration, get it all ready to get ready to do it. And what will happen is you'll be so excited about it by that point that you'll just start. Another thing is something called structured procrastination, which is, say you have 3 important things to do, right? 3 things on the top of your list. One of them is the absolute most important, and the other 2 are secondary importance. Start on the first importance. When you feel like you need a break from that, go to the level of secondary importance, go to the level of third importance. By the end of the day, you may not have finished all of them, but you have made progress on all of them. That's called structured procrastination. And then finally, some time and space tricks for you. The first thing is that, and actually it's really interesting, I had somebody say to me afterwards, okay, this is from a video called Shit Black Girls Say, which is like one of the funniest things I've ever seen, so you have to watch it, it's your homework, it's hilarious. It's good 3 minutes, and it's funny. But I actually was talking to somebody, and he like, God, he probably didn't have this attitude, but I'm gonna give it to him anyway, just in case, because that's what I felt like he did. He was like, what does time management have to do with creativity? And I was like, everything, right? Because if you don't have the time to be creative, you don't have the space, the bandwidth, the mental bandwidth, how are you gonna come up with ideas, right? So the first way to do that is to eliminate distractions. And the way I like to think about it is ignoring things to focus. Have you guys heard of Scott Hanselman? God, you guys gotta like, go like with all my peeps. Okay, so Scott Hanselman is amazing. And he's written, he has a talk that says it's not what you focus on, it's what you ignore. That's really important. And so I think that it's really important to realize that you need to actually ignore things to be able to focus on other things. If you have a fairly pronounced Facebook habit or Twitter habit or Amazon Prime habit, which is what I have, or Wikipedia habit or whatever, then you can set up, there's a lot of tools that you can use to block those sites if you know you're particularly susceptible, block those sites so that you actually don't have to go and look at them. So great browser extensions, take a picture of the thing, the slides will be online too so you can look at them. These all work, and when you do that, when you try to go to a site, it'll just block you and be like, boom, and one of them I have, it says, this block has been focused, so it's blocked so you can focus, my dear. And I'm like, oh, that's a nice little thing that I said for myself. Hey, focus, when you go into focus mode, it will block stuff. And if you try to go to a website that you've blocked, it'll put up a little page like this with a nice little aphorism, like, the mind is everything, what you think you become. Like, oh, get back to work. Another thing, I had a friend who was just like, but what about the phone? The phone is always bothering me. And I was like, great. Then put it in airplane mode or put it in do not disturb mode so that you can actually get your focus on. And then when you've got those things together, they work really well in concert with the Pomodoro technique. You guys familiar with Pomodoro? Yeah? So for those who aren't, 30-minute blocks. 25 minutes of a sprint, completely distraction-free. No email, no phone, no notifications of any sorts popping up. 25 minutes, one task, go. And you use a timer, like this Pomodoro timer. When you get to the 25 minutes, the timer goes off, you take a 5-minute break. If, like me, when you finally sit down and you do the distraction-free and you finally get into it and that 25 minutes goes off and you're like, well, like I'm in it now, then you can go for 45 minutes and then you can take a 15-minute break. You can do that. And then finally, you can also do things like fill quotas. All right, I'm going to answer 10 emails. I'm going to work on this for 10 minutes. I'm going to do 5 things, whatever it is, and do that. And then once that's done, same thing, take a break, give yourself a reward. And remember that through all of this, right, this is all a learning process. It is the journey and not that it's the process, it's not the destination, that there's no mistake, there's no win, there's no fail, there's only make. That's what we're trying to get to. We're trying to get to this place where we're actually creating. So, back to my story that I started at the beginning. You may be saying to yourself, Denise, what happened? So you worked yourself to a tizzy and then what happened? So I started the book at the end of June 2009, and I finished it at the end of February 2010. And you may be saying to yourself, oh, snap, you finished a book, what? And I thought that too, except for before I thought that, what I thought was, fail. Because I had given, like I said, I'd given the editor this incredibly aggressive schedule, and I was like, I'm going to be done in 4.5 months. And it took me 8 months to finish the book. So I felt like that I had been a failure in that respect, and that was one of the things that pushed me the whole time, was that I felt like I was behind schedule. However, I did finish a book. What? So, woo! Winning. Now, hopefully, I will be able to say the same thing at the midpoint of August for my next book. So I wrote my first book, and that was awesome. And doing that actually created these amazing things for myself. But in thinking about all of this, and especially a couple of years ago when I was first doing this talk, I was in Wales, and I woke up early in the morning because I had had a bad dream. And in this dream, I was driving with my best friend in my hometown, and I hit a bump in the road. And when I looked back in the rearview mirror, I realized that I had run over a little girl who was playing in the street. Stick with me, it gets better. And I was driving and I was like, oh my God, that was really horrible. But instead of going back to check on her and making sure everything was okay, I just kept going. And I was like, it'll just work itself out. And what I realized was that that little girl was kind of representative of my own little inner girl, my own little inner creative child. And what ends up happening is when your inner critic, or I will say for myself, when my inner critic is in charge and I'm constantly reaching for perfection and I'm constantly striving for stuff and I'm not celebrating my successes and everything, and I'm sure everybody can relate to that in some way, that what happens is that you never actually get the satisfaction from the things that you do, for a lack of a better way to say it, right? You never get that satisfaction. And it reminded me of this segment from Alice in Wonderland, you know, the whole thing when the queen talks about jam tomorrow or jam yesterday, but there's never jam today. And I thought about it and I was like, oh shit, jam is like satisfaction and reward. And if you're always pushing it off, oh, there was the one that happened a little bit ago, or it's gonna happen tomorrow, but it never happens today, it's like you never, ever actually end up getting jam, which is the whole point of what Lewis Carroll was saying in that. And I think that's the same thing, that when your inner critic happens, that's what happens. You never end up getting the satisfaction, you never end up getting the reward, and you never end up getting to the place of creating as well as you possibly can. So by sharing my own experience, I'm hoping to show you that there is an alternative, that you can use all of this information, IDing the inner critic, figuring out if it's imposter syndrome, if it's a procrastination, if it's perfectionism, and having tools to deal with it, that you can actually start to see yourself differently and realize and recapture your own inner creative child, right? Ursula Le Guin has this great quote that the creative adult, that's you guys, that's all of us. We are the children who have survived after the world tried killing us, tried making us grown up, that we are the children who survived the blandness of schooling, the unhelpful words of bad teachers, and the naysaying ways of the world, right? So take this and try to start to see yourself differently. See how you can start to work and banish your own inner critic and let out all of your own ideas, because unlike Alice in Wonderland, today is the day. Today is the day that you get to actually acknowledge yourself, acknowledge what you've done, and let your creativity flow. So, thank you very much.